Unable to resist bringing her closer, I lifted our hands to my nose, lightly brushing against her skin as her glorious scent filled my every sense. I closed my eyes and drank in her perfection. I could feel her pulse through her wrist, and as I let out a slow sigh, her heart started pounding faster. The rush of adrenaline that coursed through her veins made her smell so much more potent, but my control didn't waver for 1 second. I don't think she truly understood how different everything was now. I knew she could tell I was more relaxed being closer to her. We'd certainly spent enough nights curled up together to prove that. But I doubted she comprehended the magnitude of what thinking I'd lost her had done to me. Everything inside of me ached, felt real, physical pain at the thought of anything ever hurting her again, especially me. While I knew I still had to be careful around her, the urge to protect her was more instinctual now than even my most basic need. Her blood would always sing to me, but I knew the magnificent sound of her beating heart would always keep me from answering the call. Charlie's frenzied and disapproving thoughts interrupted my moment of reverie. I opened my eyes just in time to see him glowering at me. "Good evening, Charlie," I said politely, determined not to let my manners slip, even in the face of near hatred. He grumbled, not moving from his protective stance. It was impossible to be angry with Charlie. It was clear he loved Bella dearly, and his resistance to me was merely a product of how deeply I had hurt her. I could never blame him for doing everything in his power to make sure she'd never felt that kind of pain again. "I brought another set of applications," I told Bella, holding up the hand that wasn't clutching hers. She groaned as she noticed the quite large roll of stamps around my finger, and I knew she was hoping we had worn out our options. I had been making her apply to anywhere and everywhere I thought might make her happy. There had to be something out there exciting enough to make her want to at least taste the college experience. I also personally blame myself and my absence for making her miss most of the deadlines, so I didn't feel at least bit guilty using the Cullen name, not to mention our monetary resources, to make sure Bella had an endless number of options to choose from. "There are still a few open deadlines," I assured her, then added with a grin, "and a few places willing to make exceptions." She cringed at my words, and I felt her grip on my hand increase. I laughed, though I did hope she wouldn't be too mad at me for my persistence. "Shall we?" I asked, leading her to the kitchen with a disgruntled Charlie behind us. I arranged the applications by order of relevance, and likelihood of eliciting a response other than an eye roll from Bella. As she cleared the table, I noticed her grab her very worn copy of Wuthering Heights. I looked at her skeptically, wondering how she could read it so many times. For someone who supposedly adored love stories, I simply couldn't understand her fascination with what I could only consider a story of hate. What joy could she possibly get from the story whose characters were so cruel? "Speaking of college applications, Edward," Charlie said, stopping me from making a comment I probably would have regretted about one of Bella's favorite books. "Bella and I were talking about next year. Have you decided where you're going to school?" Never had Charlie's mind been clearer than in that moment. He wanted me far, far away, in some miserable climate he could feel confident Bella wouldn't be willing to live in. Of course, he had no way of knowing that Bella's plans centered around bad weather and isolation from civilization. "Not yet," I answered, distracting myself from that line of thinking. "I received a few acceptance letters, but I'm still weighing my options." "Where have you been accepted?" "Syracuse, Harvard, Dartmouth, and I just got accepted to the University of Alaska Southeast today," I added, winking at Bella and making her chuckle. "Harvard? Dartmouth?" Charlie asked, openly gaping. "Well, that's something." "Yeah, but the University of Alaska, you wouldn't really consider that when you can go Ivy League. I mean, your father would want you to." "Carlisle's always been fine with whatever I choose to do," I said calmly. "Besides, I didn't have a cap and gown from the University of Alaska yet. It might be time to expand the collection again." I ignored Charlie's irritated grumblings, and Bella's face broke into a huge smile. "Guess what, Edward?" "What, Bella?" "I just got my acceptance to the University of Alaska." "Congratulations! What a coincidence!" We really were enjoying this too much. I almost felt a little guilty as Charlie mumbled, Fine, I'm gonna go watch the game. Bella, 9:30. Dad? She asked cautiously. Remember the very recent discussion about my freedom? My eyes widened a bit. That part of the conversation must have happened before I'd arrived. Was Charlie finally over the worst of his brooding? Right, he sighed. Okay, 10:30. You still have a curfew on school nights. Bella's no longer grounded? I asked, excited by the possibility of spending time with her somewhere other than her house. Plus, my family really missed her. Alice was the only one who ever got to see her anymore, and even that was only because of the effect she seemed to have on Charlie. She swore it wasn't intentional, but I could hear her annoyingly smug thoughts when she was allowed to stay long past Bella's normal visiting hours. Conditionally, Charlie grumbled. What's it to you? It's just good to know. Alice has been itching for a shopping partner, and I'm sure Bella would love to see some city lights. I smiled at Bella, thinking of all the places I could take her to celebrate her newly restored freedom. She had seen nothing but the school and the four walls of her house for so long, she might actually let me get away with taking her for an extravagant night on the town. Unfortunately, my thoughts were stopped in their tracks. No, Charlie yelled, and we both turned on him wide-eyed. Dad, what's the problem? Bella asked anxiously, as I listened to her heart race. I don't want you going near Seattle right now. Huh? I told you about that story in the paper. There's some kind of gang on a killing spree in Seattle, and I want you to steer clear, okay? Gang activity, right. Humans were always quick to place some kind of blanket of blame on gangs or serial killers when they didn't understand what was really going on. Whatever sells papers. I guess in a way, we should be thankful that they had no problem fabricating excuses for the atrocities that were occurring. If anyone found out the truth, we'd have a whole different set of problems to deal with. Dad, Bella breathed, obviously embarrassed by his overprotective outburst. There's a better chance I'll get struck by lightning than the one day I'm in Seattle. No, that's fine, Charlie, I said, quick to appease his worries. I needed him to understand I was as concerned with Bella's safety as he was. And in truth, there was no way I would take Bella anywhere near Seattle, though it had nothing to do with gang activity. I didn't mean Seattle. I was thinking Portland, actually. I wouldn't have Bella in Seattle either. Of course not. I quickly glanced down at the latest newspaper article, wondering how bad it would get before someone intervened. The thought that these things were being allowed to continue appalled me. What did the Volturi exist for if not to step in where needed? And they were most definitely needed. Fine, I heard Charlie grumble as he left the room, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Things had gotten even worse than I'd realized. What? Bella started to ask, but I knew Charlie's attention wasn't entirely fixed on the game yet. Hold on, I said, passing her an application. I think you can recycle your essays for this one. Same questions. She sighed, but took the sheet reluctantly. It was hard to believe, as I gazed out her window, the reality of what was happening in Seattle. At first, Carlyle had assumed it was just a single vampire, or perhaps a small coven, passing through the city and simply being less cautious than usual. But then the numbers had gone up. Very rarely did nomads stay in one place for too long. Too many deaths in one area led to suspicion. Then, with the headlines started appearing and the murders continued, we knew we were dealing with something out of the ordinary. I wasn't sure how long I'd been silent, but Bella suddenly made a sound of disapproval and pushed the application across the table to me. Bella? Be serious, Edward. Dartmouth? I gently set the papers in front of her again, unwilling to be swayed by her self-doubts. If Dartmouth appealed to her, I could assure her acceptance. I think you'd like New Hampshire. There's a full complement of night courses for me, and the forests are very conveniently located for the avid hiker. Plentiful wildlife, I told her with a grin.